quick little housekeeping things that we've somewhat talked about already. Only the presenter will have a live mic. Everyone else will be muted, so feel free to slurp your coffee, yell at the dog, whatever you need to do. None of us are going to hear you do that. If you have questions, type them into the chat, and our master of the webinar, Craig, will relay them to whomever needs to answer them, or we'll be able to keep track. Yes, this is being recorded, and it will also be posted on the website afterwards. Let's see. And then just remember that this is an overview of all the grants for everyone. So you may have a question that's very specific to your project. Maybe this isn't the place to ask that, but you can certainly email it to us or ask us at any time, but we'll try to keep things a little more in the overview mode. And if we don't get to a question, it's not because we don't want to answer it. It's just we have a timeline. We want to get everybody off of here at a relatively somewhere around noon, which may be a bit of a stretch because there's a lot of stuff. But we are, because we're doing this on Zoom, we are able to save the chat transcript. So we'll be able to go through and double check that the questions are answered and realize the ones that we haven't answered and reach out and answer those. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is a quick overview of what the District Grant Subcommittee looks like. So it's made up of 7 teams that each focus on a different area of district grants. Today, the team leads will each present on their type of grant. With the exception of district grants, as you may notice, that particular position is vacant. So if anyone has an interest in joining the team, we have openings and would love the help. We also have our webmaster and our reports monitor speaking. And speaking of reports monitor, if you love reports and chasing down people to file them, that job is also coming open. And we'll go to the next slide, please. So a quick recap of the process of grant application. The district grants lead is open and the reports monitor job is open, Maria. And anyway, so a quick recap of the process for district grants. So first step is the club, you apply online at 5360.org. And when your project, when you click submit on that project, an email is automatically sent out to the club president requesting their authorization of the project. So you as the applicant may well have to remind your president that they need to authorize it. And that may require you to bring a laptop to the meeting, fire it up and sit there while he does it or she does it. I know our club, we've had to do that a few times. So the thing about that is you have to get them to authorize it because the project is not officially submitted until they've authorized it. And if it's not submitted properly and authorized, we don't review the project because it's not complete. So once all the authorizations are done by May 1st, because that's the deadline, then the team leads review the applications. They make their recommendations. Then shortly after, in about mid-May, the district grants subcommittee gets together, goes over all of the recommendations. Then we send our recommendation for approvals to the district board for their approval for their June meeting. And then once we have that approval, the district grant subcommittee makes an application to the Rotary Foundation called a district block grant. which is one application that includes all of the youth scholarship project, travel, and VTT applications in one big application to Rotary. They approve it, send the funds to the district. The district then sends the approval notices and sends out the funds. The only thing that's a little bit different is for global grants, because global grants, the beginning is all the same. You do the application online, everybody reviews it. The difference is once the district grants committee has approved it, you'll be notified that you've been approved for your district designated funds. And then you have to finish your global grant application, which is on the Rotary Foundation website. And then you hit submit on their website, and that'll go to TRF, and they will let you know when you're approved and what you have to do from that point on. The district is kind of out of the loop once we've told you that you have your district funds. So that is the process in a nutshell, and we'll move on. Next slide. To the grant management overview. So we're in Rotary year 2019-20, which is basically the planning year for implementing your project in the 2021 Rotary year. We're always applying a year in advance for these projects. Next slide. A few key dates for this year. Today being the first key date. You're all here, so that's great. April 1st, 2020 is the first eligible date to apply for DDF towards global grants. Heads up, the global grants are reviewed first come, first serve as they come in, so you should make all your planning based around that fact. You'll want to get it in as close to April 1st as you can. May 1st, 2020 is the Club Memorandum of Understanding deadline. So the DDF is district designated funds, MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding. So the club MOU deadline and the deadline to contribute the required amount of funds per member to the annual fund of TRF is May 1st, 2020. May 1st, 2020 is also the day district grant applications have to be in by. And if everything goes smoothly, by mid-July to August, that would be the anticipated date that we receive approval back from TRF, and we can start the process of getting you all your money. And speaking of money, the next slide. Get the next slide, please. So our district, as anticipated grant allocations, our district, we're very, very lucky. We have a pretty hefty sum available to us. We have approximately $480,000 US dollars. So all this money would be in US dollars. I think we're actually one slide too far. We need to go back one slide. There we go. Thanks. So 50% of that 481, roughly 480,000, goes towards district grants. So we have just under 240,000 available. Out of that 240,000, we have 6,300 admin fee, 10,000 contingency. We hold back. We have 22,725 allocated to travel grants, which leaves us just under 200,000 US dollars for district projects, vocational training teams, youth programs, and scholarships. So I see someone's asking how these compare to last year's in the last 5 years. Every year the number goes up. It's all based on money that we send in as a district donations to the annual fund. And it's, I think there's gonna be more about that in the global grant chunk, how we get the money. But it always goes up a little bit. So then we can go on to the next slide. The admin fee is the money to pay for the webinar and any some office expenses and things like that to keep this keep the process going. Okay, so we'll go on to global grants. So the other 50% of that 480,000 roughly is allocated to global grants. Global grants also receive some money from some specific TRF endowments. So there's a little bit more money for global grants. And for those, we set aside 30,000 for global scholarships that you'll hear more about later. We set aside 25,000 for peace centers, which you'll also hear about later, which leaves us a little less than 220,000 available for projects and more VTTs, which are vocational training teams. Next slide. TRF is the Rotary Foundation. So as with getting any money, there are some restrictions. They're not too bad. They require active participation of Rotarians. No money can be spent before the grant is formally approved. They can't give, you just can't give cash to a beneficiary organ or an organization. You can't fund operating administration or indirect expenses of another organization. And depending on the type of grant, there may be other restrictions, particularly with global grants. And you can get all those more specific rules. They're all in the Rotary terms and conditions on myrotary.org. So you can check that out if you need, if you want more detailed info. And you can always, if you have a question, once again, you can always get a hold of somebody on the grants team. We'll be happy to help you out. So I see there's lots of questions about what is a memorandum of understanding. If we can go on to the next screen, sorry. And the MOU and the club qualification. We can go on to the next screen. So both the district and the club must qualify to receive TRF funds, both district designated funds, DDF, and global grant funds. So what happens is the district signs an MOU with TRF to ensure that we have proper governance for the grants, and that covers both district and the global grants. Whoops, go back one. There we go. And then the club must sign an MOU with the district in order to qualify to receive grants, and they have to report on the use of how they use their funds. And the TRF can audit the district at any time. Now we can go on to the next one. So the club qualification requirements. In order to qualify for district grants, at least one person from your club must attend this grant seminar. Hopefully that person is actually interested in grants and not just the one person that was available on the day we're doing this. Your club must contribute an average of $50 US per member to the Rotary Foundation's annual fund by May 1st, 2020, or at the time of application. You have to give a little to get a lot. And then you must have your MOU, your Memorandum of Understanding, must be signed by your President-elect and President-elect nominee and uploaded to the district5360.org website by May 1st, 2020. Next slide. So where do you get the MOU? As with just about every piece of information we're going to give you today, you go to the Rotary5360.org website. In this case, click the tab that says documentation, scroll down until you see the Memorandum of Understanding and download it from the site. The next one, please. And then what do you do with it when you have it? Well, your board should discuss it and make sure they're on board with signing it. Then your president-elect and president nominee must sign it. And the reason it's the president-elect and the president-elect nominee that sign it, not your current president, is again, everything we're doing is for the next Rotary year. So you're president, and then you have 2 years to be able to spend the money. So it's everything you're doing right now in preparation will happen in your president-elect and your president nominee's years, not your current president's year. And once you have it signed, then you have to upload it to the website. And the instructions for that are go to the website, select documentation. There's a section called First Steps. It says upload your club's MOU, click the button, enter the year, attach the document, and that's it. It's that simple. We hope the MOU should be available by Monday, the new one, if you're anxious to get cracking on that. And that kind of gets us through the quick overview of everything and into the important part, which is actually information about the grants themselves. And we're going to start with the youth program grants, and I will turn it over to Kurt Kolchuk, our foundation chair, who's going to do that part of the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. How are you all this morning? Anyway, this seems a bit unusual for me in that normally doing a presentation, I stand up, walk around a little bit. Sitting in one spot is maybe a bit challenging. But there are some benefits, of course. Nobody knows that I'm wearing my fuzzy pink bedroom slippers to this webinar.
He is.
Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about 3 different grants: the district youth grants, the district district scholarships, and the district project grants. All of these 3 grants have a lot of things in common. First of all, your club puts in some money, and the district gives you even more money to help along on these worthwhile causes. The other couple things in common are the number of grants that you can, applications you can submit each year, and pooling, multiple clubs joining together to make more difference in the world. And we'll cover that in a little bit. So Mary, if you can turn to the next slide, please. So youth program grants, maximum grant that you can get from the district is $2,000. Your club must contribute at least 50% of whatever you asked for. So if you ask for $1,000, your club has to contribute $500. If you want to get the full $2,000, your club has to contribute $1,000. Your club, of course, can actually put in any amount above that. It's not actually true that the maximum is $3,000. The most you'll get from the district is $2,000. What is also allowed is that if you want to do a bigger program, bigger project, is that you can pool with one or more other Rotary clubs. So multiple clubs can get together, each of them putting in $1,000, each of them getting $2,000 from the district to get a much larger grant. So this This pooling is possible for the youth programs, the scholarships, the projects, and the vocational training team grants. I just got, everyone may have seen exactly what age. We're not going to get into a lot of the real details of some of the rules for these grants. Getting into every single detail would take us days because there are so many different types of grants. So more information is available on rotary5360.org, which talks about the details of what is and isn't allowed on each of these grants. Mary, next slide, please. So another commonality between these various types of district grants is that each year your club can put in application for 2 grants. What we want to do is have you prioritize them, which is the most important to you. Your club should be your priority 1, and priority 2 is the one that's next most important to you. And I'll explain why that's important in a second. If you don't prioritize, we may disqualify both applications because we don't know which one's the priority. Next slide. So what is allowed for the youth programs is air travel for Rotary youth exchange, short-term and long-term exchanges. It excludes optional travel, i.e. if they're doing a side trip for holiday, etc. At one time, travel had to be arranged through the Rotary Foundation. That's no longer true. Usually more convenient for you to arrange it yourself. You can also pay for inbound, outbound student orientation events for the exchange students. These are only third-party expenses. And you can also pay third-party costs of inbound and outbound counselor training. Next slide. You can pay for RILA and RIPEN camps. You can contribute the registration fee for Rotary Alberta Youth Entrepreneurship Camp. School fees for exchange students. Startup expenses for Rotaract or Interact clubs. And the cost of Rotaractors or Interactors to improve their skills in leadership and team building. Next slide. What you cannot pay for through a district grant, if your club wants to pay for this on its own, it's all okay. This cannot be part of a youth programs grant though. And that's registration fee itself for starting up a new club, Rotaract or Interact, support of fundraisers, expenses related to Rotary events. So paying a exchange student's costs for district conference is not allowed. Next slide. Entertainment expenses, expenses incurred by Rotarians or host parents for travels or meals, lodging. One of the things that is common in many Rotary programs, and this is a Rotary Foundation rule, as indeed all of these things that I've just been going through are actually Rotary Foundation rules. These are not made up arbitrarily by our district. Here's a very important one that Rotary does not allow is Rotarians or their children or their parents, direct relatives to have monetary gain from any Rotary program. And that includes paying the expenses of those individuals for youth programs. Other things not included, stipends paid to exchange students, host families. As well, any optional travel expenses cannot be paid for out of a youth program grant. Mary? So important for all reporting, and this not just youth programs, is that you need to have receipts for everything. Receipts must be attached from all the expenditures and must be from third parties. Rotary's receipts from Rotary entities won't be accepted. One of the little bit different are expenses incurred for Ryla and Ripon camp. These expenses will go directly to the district grant subcommittee and won't have to be attached by the club. Next slide. Like all of this information, the place to go, of course, is rotary5360.org. On the documentation page, you'll find all kinds of things about all of these programs. Next slide, Mary. So district undergraduate scholarship grants. So these grants are, as it says, for undergraduate scholarships. They cannot be used for master's or PhD programs, strictly undergraduate. Next slide, please, Mary. So very similar to the youth program grant, maximum grant's $2,000. Club must put in at least 50% of what they're asking for the district. The maximum total, if your club puts in 1,000, district puts in 2,000 is 3,000. And as I said before, not quite a maximum. Your club can put in any amount they want above the 1,000. The most you'll get from the district is 2,000. Next slide, Mary. This scholarship can support a variety of types of education, university studies, trade schools, technical schools. It isn't limited to universities. It can be any type of undergraduate training. The clubs are free to choose who they send. The clubs can establish any eligibility criteria they see fit. Keeping in mind, of course, the four-way test. Is it fair to all concerned, of course? Ideally, the scholarship should be paid to the post-secondary institution and not the student. This, among other things, when you go to report, we need receipts for everything. The simplest receipt you can get is the tuition receipt from the institution. Nice and simple for reporting. Keep it easy for yourselves. Mary? Each scholarship, there's no minimum amount. Your club can provide one scholarship for $3,000, or it could provide 6 scholarships for $500. It's all up to the club. As we said before, if you want to offer a very large scholarship, clubs could pool, join together, each of them put in $1,000, each of them getting $2,000 from the district to make a much larger scholarship. Next one, Mary. Again, same rules apply, maximum application of 2, and you must prioritize. Next slide, Mary. And like all these others, you can find much, much more information on rotary5360.org. Next slide, Mary. So district project grants. These are grants that can either be local or international. They cannot be tied to a global grant. Next slide, Mary. Next slide. Looks like this has, okay. Minimum grant awarded is $250. The maximum is $7,500. Next slide, Mary. Club cash is matched on a 3-to-1 basis. So for the maximum, to get a $7,500 grant, your club has to put in $2,500 of funds. Your club can put in any amount above that. Minimum to get the $7,500 is $2,500. You can ask for a lot less. As I said, can be used for local initiatives or international initiatives. Mary? Up. And pooling of funds, once again, this is allowed and even encouraged. We like clubs to get together and do great things together. The pooling is common. anytime there's a pooling, only the lead club needs to submit the reports. Just to answer a couple quick questions. The youth scholarship must be for a resident of our district. They cannot be for a foreign, sorry, I've got mine. So I believe the education could happen in a foreign country. The student has to be from our district. And all of these district grants are in Canadian dollars. It's only when we get to global grants that we'll be talking in US dollars. Next slide, Mary. Once again, maximum applications for each club is 2. You must prioritize. Next slide, Mary. And click again, Mary. So why we are asking you to prioritize, and you must prioritize, is that we have a limited amount of funds to give out. If we get more applications than the funds available, the district grants team needs to decide on which grants applications get the funding. Next slide, Mary. And one of the easiest ways is listening to the clubs. What's most important to your clubs? Your priority, hence you put priority 1 on it, priority 2 on the one that's not quite as important. The priority ones will be the ones looked at first. If enough money remains after the priority 1 applications have been reviewed and the money dispersed, then priority 2 applications will be looked at. And we do actually have a ranking system, which guess where you can find it? On Rotary5360.org. Once awards have been determined, the decision is final. Next slide, Mary. Okay, a little bit on final reporting. Final reports for all of the project types we've just talked about are, and receipts are due within 2 months of the date of completion or July 15th, 2022, whichever is earlier. Next. The reporting forms are available, guess where? On Rotary5360.org. You're hopefully going to remember that by the time we're done today. And receipts are, as mentioned, required for all expenditures, really important. Next. And ensure that your receipts cover the amount that you've said. That if you've asked for $7,500 from the district and your club's putting in $2,500, you need receipts for $10,000, not just for the $7,500. Mary? And you know where you can get the application forms. Next. And there are, besides district grants, and we're going to talk about this very, very quickly, there are other grants available from Alberta Culture, and you can read the list here. There are 2 that are most commonly used by Rotary clubs. Mary? And that's the Community Facilities Enhancement Program, CFEP, and the Community Initiatives Program, CIP. The website is there. You can look at it later, or you can simply Google Alberta Culture, CIP, or CFEP to get more information. And those will pop up, of course. Mary? So CIP, they have 3 different streams. For local initiatives, there's project-based grants and operating grants, both at $75,000 maximum. For international development, the maximum is $2,500. Next slide. 25,000, sorry. Actually, I'm going to talk about CIP one little bit more. CIP matches all funds raised within Alberta. That includes club funds, and if you get a district's grant, the DDF, the district grant, counts as Alberta raised funds, and CIP matches your dollars 1 for 1. Next slide, Mary, thank you. Community Facility Enhancement Program. It's really about facilities. It's upgrading, building, repairing, renovating community facilities. That's what the CFEP program's all about. Again, for these programs, go to the website and you'll find out a lot more about them and the details of them. These are not administered by Rotary. These are administered by the Alberta Culture. Next slide. And we now have a 10-minute break. So thank you all for listening. And I'm not on next. However, I will be coming back to you in a little bit later in the presentation. Thank you for listening.
What is the purpose of a project travel grant? So the district provides travel grants to help Rotarians working on global grants visit the site and the host Rotary Club to plan the project and or do a community needs assessment. And we'll move on to the next slide, please. So what does a travel grant cover? So the maximum award for a travel grant is $2,500 Canadian and can be used to reimburse the costs of return economy airfare, travel insurance, transport to and from the airport, and local travel related to the planning, accommodation, basic airline luggage fees, immunization, and visa fees. So pretty all-encompassing. But the very first thing you should do is check with Andrew that we still have grants available before you start your process. The next one, please. So eligibility? Who's eligible? Any Rotarian from District 5360 that is traveling to support project initiatives endorsed by their club. One of the big things you need to get is you have to have a letter of invitation provided by the host Rotary Club. Remembering that in a global grant, the host Rotary Club is a Rotary Club in the country that you're doing the project in. And the District 5360 Club is actually the international club in that case. So you need a letter from that Rotary Club saying, we would like you to come over and help us plan this and do our community needs assessment in order to get a travel grant. And finally, you have to be on site a minimum of 5 days and a maximum of 30 days. And these travel grants are more important than ever right now because TRF now makes community needs assessment mandatory to have a global grant approved. So this is a great way for Rotarians from our district to get feet on the ground and make sure everything is exactly what you think it's going to be before you start to get too deep into this process with a global grant. The more hands-on we get with international projects, the better. Next slide. What are you allowed to do? Well, you're there to plan a new international global grant project, or to plan the next phase of a global grant project, or to complete the community needs assessment. So it's really a planning, it's there just for you to go make sure that all your ducks are in a row, everything is lined up with the host club, the implementing agency, and that most importantly, that what the plan is what the community needs. And the next slide. What you're not allowed to do. You can't just go visit a country and sniff around and see if you can find a project. You have to already have a project in mind. And the purpose of the visit cannot be to conduct sister club visits, do business with organizations that do not have a connection to the project or host Rotary Club, or just go to conduct a fundraising activity with the host club or cooperating organization. And project implementation is also not eligible. And that is because there are ways within a global grant to get some travel money during project implementation. So this is, again, really just for the planning stages. And the next one. So it's a little different about travel grants is you have to cover all your expenses for your trip, come back and submit a final report with receipts, and then you will be reimbursed for those expenses up to $2,500 Canadian. So you don't get the money up front, you get it at the back end. And I can tell you, I personally have used a couple of travel grants and I've never had any issue bringing back receipts and getting the report approved and the money reimbursed quite quickly. So it's not it shouldn't be a challenge at all. And the next one. So some grant conditions: a Rotary Club cannot receive more than 2 district travel grants per year. 2 or more Rotarians from the same project can travel on 1 grant, but it's still to a maximum of $2,500. And the Rotarians don't have to be from the same club. So you could be the lead club on a global grant and have another club supporting your global grant, and a Rotarian from each of those clubs can go to the site to visit and do that assessment. And they could actually travel on the same grant, but that means you're splitting $2,500 between 2 people instead of 1 person. So you're probably not going to get all your expenses covered in that case, but it can be done. And each project site cannot benefit from more than 2 travel grants per year. And the final report must be submitted to the district within 60 days of return, which is never a problem because you don't get paid until you submit the report. So the next one is ineligible items. So you're not allowed to stay at a resort or all-inclusive accommodation. You're not allowed to travel with side excursions, trip extensions for vacations, and you're not allowed to bring companions, spouses, partners, or friends. Basically, the travel grant is for you to go to do Rotary work and not have a vacation. So we have to keep tabs on all the dollars that leave us and make sure that they're just being used for Rotary work. And next one, if you have more questions, Andrew's the guy to ask. And there's his email. And of course, all this information and so much more is on Rotary5360.org. And that quickly is travel grants. And I'll turn it over to Craig for vocational training teams.
Okay, hi everybody. Craig Henderson here. I'm the team lead for the vocational training teams. So we can go very quickly through what we have on offer for the VTT part of our district program here. So to the next slide, please. So the main question people ask is, what is a vocational training team? And it's a group of professionals who travel to another country to learn more about their profession or to teach locals about a particular field. In cases of VTT, travel can be two ways. You can travel to another country. You can also have people come to Canada. Grants can support the travel of more than one team. And on each vocational training team, the teams can consist of members of a Rotary Club and non-Rotarians as well. So next, please. And one of the changes from years past is that the travel is no longer required to be booked through Rotary travel office. Travel, in fact, can be arranged by team members or the organizer. But notwithstanding your newfound flexibility to make your own travel arrangements, VTT travelers must all come with sufficient travel insurance. And in particular, if you're a medical practitioner participating in a VTT, you must have additional insurance to cover that aspect as well. And forward, please. Forward again. So there are two types of grants available for VTTs. One is a district grant, and you would apply to the district. And by now, the theme of through the Rotary5360.org website is probably becoming familiar. But there are also global grant styled VTTs. And in order to apply for those, you would actually apply online to TRF through the Rotary.org website. VTTs can be combined into a global grant, and a global grant with an embedded VTT component would qualify for an additional $5,000 worth of DDF, assuming that sufficient funds are available to cover that. Next, please. So the district VTT grants are somewhat more scope flexible than the global grant ones are. And as mentioned, the application for a district style of VTT is through our district grant subcommittee website. But in all cases, the team that is going to travel as part of this grant has to include relevant experience and preferably be led by a Rotarian. We do allow for cooperation with other organizations, not necessarily other Rotary clubs, but as long as the application is compelling. We do allow travel to any country except those that are specifically declared to be barred by the Rotary Foundation. And we maintain an active list of the countries that you cannot travel to on the district Rotary5360.org grants website. As mentioned earlier, we can allow for training in Canada. That's the both ways component of it. And the VTT must support the RI mission of health, education, and reduction of poverty. Next, please. So for 2021, the district VTT grants, as similar to what we've heard earlier, is the maximum award is $7,500. And the club contribution has to be a minimum of 1/3 of the award. We do allow one grant application per club. The grants can be pooled, and multiple clubs can apply as part of the same VTT and pool of funds. We only allow one pool grant application per club out of all the district grant applications for things like the VTTs, the youth programs, scholarships, and projects. Next, please. The global style VTT has to satisfy all of the global grant requirements, including paying particular interest to how the proposed VTT will support one or more of the Rotary Foundation areas of focus. In the case of a global VTT, we must have the host club or the district where the project takes place. And there's a minimum request for matching of funds from the Rotary Foundation. Just in terms of VTTs, a team is 2 people or more with relevant experience who are led by a Rotarian leader. Next, please. And the application deadline for the district grant VTT this year, like all of the other district grants, the application date has been moved up from mid-month to May 1st of 2020, and the awards will be announced in the July to August timeframe. As always, the application form and information is available for the district-based VTT on our Rotary5360.org website. And just as a note here, there are actually 3 separate application forms that comprise the full application, and we must complete all 3 of these. So there's the basic application form. There's a special VTT memorandum of understanding that has to be executed, and there is an application form that has to be completed for each participant in the VTT as well. So we need participant application form for each member of the team. We need the district VTT MOU and the standard project application. Next, please. And I think that is a very brief overview of the vocational training teams. And I've just unmuted Kurt, so back over to you for the global grants.
Great. Thank you, Craig. And you get me again. So now we're going to talk about global grants. These are one of the most complicated grants within the Rotary rule, with the various things that go on related to them and the rules involved. And part of that is due to their size, which we'll talk about. These are meant for larger projects, not for very small projects. We actually, as I see here, we've got a request for to ask questions. Are you okay with answering some questions, Craig?
Through the chat window?
Well, I guess they could start on the chat window and you could answer them verbally, because I believe we're ahead of schedule at the moment a bit.
Okay, let's do that then.
Okay, any questions out there, I guess? Okay, that's a good suggestion, Pat. Sorry, Maria, what template are you referring to? Oh, proposals for the grants. So for the proposal, there is not a template. There is an application form which covers a lot of it, but it is not a template for the actual grant. Having said that, for some of the simpler grants, it effectively is, like the scholarship grant, all the information would be put on the application form. Likewise, for the youth grant, all the information would be on the application form. For project grants, it's usually a bit more complicated, and hence there's some information on the application, but the expectation is that you provide a proposal. Okay, thank you, Minot. Do we have any more questions out there?
Just review the chats, what was been asked.
So looking at some of the chats that have gone by and questions answered, I'm just going to quickly answer them if I can verbally. I'm just rolling through here. Acronyms, I think we've been doing a bit better on that. Vocational training teams, VTT. The admin fee. So what the question was, what's the admin fee within the distribution of funds? That's the fee that pays for things like the conference, the seminar that we usually have. It pays for our office expenses when we do mail outs. It pays for the upkeep on the district grant website, those sorts of overheads. Memorandum of Understanding is an MOU. TRF, the Rotary Foundation. I'm still scanning. Scholarships. These scholarships are only for residents of our district, and I believe they can be used to pay for tuition at a foreign school. All the district level grants are in Canadian dollars. A question about Rotaract clubs. So Rotaract clubs, the last Council of Legislation, sort of the governing body of the overall rules of Rotary, changed the status of Rotaract clubs within the Rotary world, really elevating them more closer to being Rotary clubs. However, there is a document which explains the new understanding, the new rules of engagement between Rotary International and Rotaract. Still says that Rotaract clubs are not eligible for grants funded by the Rotary Foundation. Having said that, a Rotaract club can partner with a Rotary club, of course, to do a project. And the Rotary club being the entity that applies for the grant and would be responsible for the use of the funds. Regarding Alberta grants from Alberta Culture, this team is not an expert on these grants. Unfortunately, we can't be an expert on everything. And there are a number of different programs available. As you saw on the one slide, there are at least 8 different programs available. The rules do change on an ongoing basis. The best place to look for them is look on Alberta Culture's website. There's a lot of information about the grants, and for each of the grants, there is also contact information for the individuals that are responsible for that type of grant, that are always very willing to help you out with all of this. CFEP grants have been used by a number of clubs in the district, including for helping to fund Rotary Challenger Park and Athletic Park in Olds. So regarding the travel grants, it's really, the travel grants are focused specifically on needs assessment, and project definition. The travelers must be Rotarians, must go directly there and directly back. No side trips are allowed when you take advantage of this type of grant. We asked for clarification about spending of scholarship funds. So this rule is that I'm going to talk about applies to all types of grants funded by the Rotary Foundation. You cannot spend or commit funds until the grant gets approved. And this is true of all the grants we'll be talking about today. So in terms of a scholarship, yes, you could hand out a scholarship in the fall of 2020 for an application put in May 1st. However, you could not commit to the student that you are going to give them that scholarship until the grant is formally approved, which will not happen until July or August of the year. So it's a yes, although for a scholarship that might be a bit tight. Realistically, most clubs, it's for the next year, the 2021 in this case, that the scholarship would be for. We got a question about pooling. The limits on pooling are pretty broad. Each club can only pool one pooling application per year. However, for a singular project, any number of clubs can join together in that project and pool their funds. You could have 2 clubs, 5 clubs, 10 clubs, each putting in $2,500, each asking for $7,500 from the district. Now, having said that, if 10 clubs pooled, it would rapidly use up much of the funds from the district. Depending on the other applications, not all of them may be approved. We got a question about district grants and district VTTs, and the answer is a club can receive one of each of them. If there's enough funds, potentially they could, both their priority 1 and priority 2s could be approved. And then we got a question about templates, which we answered. And sorry, I'm looking at the last question that came here. And yes, addressing questions after each section, I think that's a good idea, Mary. We're sort of catching up now. Does not providing money until after the money is spent that people who have less disposable income are by default excluded. So this particular, the only grant that the money is provided after the expenditure is for travel grants. Want to clarify to start with. All of the other grants, the funding is provided before the grant can start, before the project or activity can start. The reason the travel grants are done the way they are is unfortunately the grant subcommittee has had some bad experiences in the past with inappropriate expenditure of funds and has had great challenges getting the money back after the fact when it was provided ahead of time. So several years ago, the decision was made to do that. I'm reading the next thing that popped up as a private. They can keep minimized window to. So yeah, thanks, Hank. So you can minimize the windows such as the speaker's window rather than having it very large or all the participants. Up on the right-hand side, at least on my screen, if I hover over the top one, I get a choice of what I show on the top right-hand side. Okay, I think we're caught up. So, global grants. What I'd like to do here in terms of questions is that you can type your questions in during the chat while I'm going through the presentation. Type them in on the chat, and I will answer them at the end of the section, or possibly at the end of each slide if that's appropriate. So, what are global grants? Global grants are for international projects only. These are not for local projects. They require at least 2 Rotary clubs involved. One in the country where the project is taking place. In Rotary terms, that's called the host club because they are hosting the project. Typically, we would be the international club, the other club involved. They are tend to be large projects. There are minimum amounts that you can apply for, and maximum amounts, of course. One of the big sources of fundings for clubs for this type of project is the district designated funds that have been allocated to global grants. We'll also talk about what other grants are available and how do you get started applying for a global grant. Mary? Okay. I said they must be international. The funding, a lot of the funding for this type of grant comes from the Rotary Foundation and that's a part of it, part of the definition. For the global grant itself, you apply online to the Rotary Foundation through the rotary.org website. And as I said, you have to have 2 clubs, minimum of 2. The international club, that's us here typically, and the host club, the country where the project's being carried out in. There has been one project where that was flipped around regarding the floods a few years ago, helping to do recovery in High River, where a club here, the High River Club, was a host club, and another club outside of Canada, outside of our district, outside of Canada, I should say, was the international club. To apply for this type of grant, both clubs need to be qualified. Different districts have different rules about qualification. Some of the rules are in common. The district has to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Rotary Foundation, and the club has to sign a memorandum of understanding between the club and the district. And global grants are all about leveraging your club's funds big time, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Next slide, Mary. And these can be complicated for a number of reasons. A lot depends on how many sources of funding you go for. Some of the complications are around the different sources of funding, is that some of the different sources have different qualifications, different criteria for qualifying, or different things that they will support or fund. So to get all of the possible grants, you have to have your project meeting all of the criteria from each of the funding sources. Another complication are the application deadline dates. So you have to have your ducks in the row in terms of the order you apply for these various grants, because for some of them, you need the other grant funding in place to be able to apply for the grant. Another complication is that some of the funding sources are in Canadian dollars and some are in US dollars. So you have the whole exchange rate thing happening there. Sort of going back, a question came up to that relates to the previous slide. So each club involved, the host and the international club, must have 3 members on the committee. So there needs to be a committee of 6, and that includes the 2 primary members, 1 from each of the clubs. Next slide, Mary. So we'll talk about some of the criteria and restrictions on global grant projects as set by the Rotary Foundation. So every global grant project needs to be in one of the 6 areas of focus, and we'll review those in a minute. They need to meet the definition of sustainability, and in particular, Rotary's definition of sustainability, which is maybe slightly different than you may think. They have a mechanism to gain sustainability as part of the definition. You also can apply for a global grant without applying for DDF funds from the district, in which case there are no deadlines. You can apply for a global grant anytime you want, and you do not need district approval if you go supply all the funds yourself or outside of the district funding. Next slide, please, Mary. So, where does all this money come from, you may ask? When you as a Rotarian contribute to the annual fund, there's a 3-year lag. Your donation goes into the annual fund. It earns money on the investments that the Rotary Foundation makes. The money that's earned is used to pay the operating costs of the Rotary Foundation, which means every dollar that you put in 3 years later comes out to be used to do good in the world. What a great mechanism they've got in place, much better than many foundations or charitable organizations. 3 years after you put it in, 50% of it comes to be controlled by our district. We don't quite get actually all that into our bank account. We control how it's spent. 50% the trustees of the foundation controls. The funds that we get are called district designated funds. The trustees control the World Fund. I'm going to stay on the trustee side for a moment. Most of the funding from the World Fund goes to global grants, and some of that international funding that we get goes to global scholarships and to the global peace centers. The World Fund also contributes a smaller amount to the peace centers and the Polio Plus funds. Come back to what I said, most of the World Fund goes to global grants. What this means that of the dollar you put in, about 90% of it comes back to our district and is controlled by our district on how it's spent. Much of that on global grants, decided by clubs in our district, supported by clubs in our district. So the clubs that our district designated funds that our district controls, we put in 50% towards global grants and 50% towards district grants. There's a huge amount of money there. Our district is one of the best off financially in terms of the amount of money we provide for grants that our clubs apply for, and in fact our clubs end up deciding where that money goes. Got a question, do we know how much from the World Fund to the Peace Center and Polio Plus? The answer, it varies year to year. I do not know the answer offhand. The Rotary Foundation annual report would have that information in it. Okay, next slide, please, Mary. So, district designated funds for global grants. So global grants are all in US dollars. The Rotary Foundation is a US-based organization. They deal in US dollars. So for 2020, 2021, it is estimated, it's not known, it won't actually be known for another 8-9 months now, but our estimate at the moment is around $218,000 will be available for global grants from our district side supporting global grants. There are 4 different types of grants available from the district. They're called types A, B, C, and D. The types B and D, we have not given out for many years now, a number of years now. So we are not going to talk about them. We are going to talk only about A and C. One of the reasons, and the reason why the B's and D's have not been given out, their application dates come later in the year when you can start applying, and all of the funds have been given out before those dates come out. And I got a question, what happens when the DDF for global grants is not used? So the answer is, in recent years, all of that money, except for a very small amount, has been used by applications from the clubs. Any that is left over is carried over into the next year. It has been a very small amount each year for a variety of complicated reasons. We do get funds coming into the DDF for global grants throughout the year. Again, too complicated to go into at this time. It's a longer explanation than we have time for. So we do end up with a little bit each year carried over, not much. Some of the simple ones, I'll actually talk about a simple one, is that if a club decides they're not going to move forward with the project right near the end of the year, that money goes back into the pool available and would be carried over into the next year, and we allocate those funds for a project in the upcoming year. Something that's important is that for both the type A and C grants, there is one pool of money that the grants come out of. There's not a specific amount designated for each of the types. To get any of this funding, you have to meet all the Rotary Foundation criteria. And what's important, and it's been mentioned already, the applications for this type of grants, the opening date for the applications is April 1st, 2020. The grants are allocated on a first come, first served basis, assuming the application meets all the criteria, of course. If it doesn't, it's not going to be allocated funds, which means the funds typically run out each year. And in the last few years anyway, we have run out of funds. So get your application in as close to April 1st as you can is the message. Next slide, please. Already mentioned that it needs to meet all the TRF requirements because this is a global grant. If you're applying for a type A grant. Important is the opening date for applications is April 1st. The closing date is June 30th, 2021. I'll go back to what I said. Typically, we run out of funds well before that date. These funds are, type A grant is awarded to the international club on the global grant project. Each year, every club can apply for up to 3 grants. These have to be for different global grants. You cannot get 2 type A grants for one project. You can only get 1 type A grant for one project. A club can apply for 3 type A grants, each for a different project.
Ask if there are any questions.
Any questions? What's the minimum size of a global grant? We're going to cover that in a little bit, Pat. We'll go over some of the rules about global grants, sizes, etc. Any other questions? Okay, next slide, Mary.
Excellent.
Okay, type A grants. So this is a change from last year. The change was made to help everyone, including the District Grants Subcommittee, as well as the clubs, avoid some of the confusion. In prior years, the club, to get a type A grant, your club would have had to contribute 5,000 Canadian dollars. Then the rest of the global grant process was all in US dollars. we decided to simplify that starting this year. Your club needs to commit to contributing a minimum of $4,000 to the project. By contributing $4,000, you will get $15,000 from the district in the form of a district designated for funds for global grant type A grant. This is not at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about this. This is not a scalable type of matching. We only give out $15,000, no more, no less. Your club has to put in a minimum of $4,000. They cannot put in less. They can put in, your club can put in any amount it wants to support the project. It's all good. The more money you put in, the bigger your project, the more you can do. For the funds that the club puts in, each dollar you put in, the Rotary Foundation will add 50 cents towards your project. Even better deal is the $15,000 that comes from the district. Rotary Foundation puts $1 into the grant, into your project. So there, for $15,000 from the district, Rotary Foundation puts in another $15,000. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. I'll finish this slide and then ask for questions. Oh. Flipping back and forth. So, Pat, to answer your question, the minimum size project for a global grant total project cost budget is $30,000. The maximum funding provided by the Rotary Foundation, actually that has recently changed. It is actually now $400,000. So a global grant can be very, very, very large. Having said that, as my note is that the project could actually be any size. However, the maximum that the foundation provides is $200,000. Just as a note, something that needs to be talked about is that when your club funds get contributed to a project, and this only applies to club funds, you have two choices. You can send your funds directly to the project bank account, or you can send your funds to the Rotary Foundation. If you send so backtrack one step, every global grant project needs a dedicated bank account. This cannot be a bank account that is used for anything else other than the project. So your club can send the funds there. If you send the funds there, you of course are charged any transfer fees, wire transfer fees that your bank charges. You have to pay them. Your alternative is to send them to the Rotary Foundation, in which case you will have to add an additional 5% administration fee for any of the funds that you send to the Rotary Foundation. This is above your commitment. To answer your question, Bill, for the Rotary Foundation portion of the global grant, it previously was $200,000 as it says on the slide. They recently changed, the Rotary Foundation recently changed that amount to $400,000, provided by, that they will provide towards the grant. So here's a good place to talk about the Rotary Foundation's grant terms and conditions. And before that, I'll ask if there are any questions up to this point. Okay, no questions. So, yeah, to answer the 5% is a flat fee. It is paid. So I'll use an example. If your club committed $4,000 US, to the project and you sent those funds to directly to the Rotary Foundation, then you would actually have to send, I'm doing the math in my head here, $4,200 US to the Rotary Foundation rather than 4,000. That would be the 5% administration fee that would be in place. And you would pay that once. Okay, to answer the next question, the individual bank account is for global grant projects only. All the other projects can be use club bank accounts that are used for a variety of items. With the change to what is the threshold? With the change to 400,000, what is the threshold for a cadre visit? Those thresholds have not changed. The threshold for a cadre visit is so actually that's a good. I will actually go back to where I started. There is a document that is available that is the Rotary Grants Terms and Conditions document. This document is available on the Rotary5360.org website. You can also find it very easily by Googling Rotary Grants Terms and Conditions. First thing that pops up will be this document. This document explains the Rotary Foundation's rules for all of the grants, not details of, I'll backtrack, not details of the variety of district grants. However, some of the base rules for district grants and some of the base rules for global grants are explained in this document. It does talk about some of the things we just talked about, that a global grant project does require a dedicated bank account. That's one of the items that you would find in this document. What you'll also find in the document is the thresholds between when a cadre visit is required. I'll explain. A cadre visit, if your project is over a certain size, a global grant project is over a certain size, then an expert on that type of project will go and visit the project site, will look over the project plans, will look over the physical site depending on the type of project, and will make recommendations for project improvement, changes to make the project a better project. And there are two different thresholds for that. One is the total size of the project, and one is the amount of money that the Rotary Foundation is putting in. To get the details, I very strongly suggest you look at the terms and conditions document. I would also suggest that anybody planning any sort of project reviews that document so they understand some of the ground rules that the foundation insists on. Did I answer your question, Judy? Or at least to where you can find the information? Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, next slide, please. So, I always like pictures, so we're going to do a picture here. So, if you apply for are going to do a global grant in a country and you apply for a type A grant and you're going to go to the Rotary Foundation and apply for a global grant, we're going to do a bit of an example. So your club puts in $4,000 US. Next slide, Mary. You apply for the type A grant, it gets approved. You get $15,000 from the district designated funds. Next slide, please. The Rotary Foundation matches your club funds 50 cents on the dollar for $2,000. it matches the district funds 1-for-1 for $15,000. So the foundation contributes $17,000. So what does this mean? Your project puts in $4,000. Next slide, Mary. And your project is $36,000. So huge leverage on the $4,000 that your club put in. Pat, going back to your question, you asked what the minimum was. With the way the rules work, if you're applying for a Type A grant and are successful in getting it, you automatically exceed the $30,000 minimum because now your project is $36,000. Next slide, please. So a Type C grant is our district wants clubs to work together. This is a Type C grants are a way to encourage that collaboration between clubs within our district or even worldwide. We'll start with within our district. So if you want to support a project that one of the other clubs in our district is the International Club, you can apply for a Type C grant. You can actually apply for a Type C grant for any global grant project. It doesn't have to be a global grant project that another club in our district is involved in. Any number of clubs can get together and effectively pool, as the term was used in the other types of grants, their funds together. So any number of clubs can apply for Type C grants for one project. However, each club can only apply for one Type C grant. And just like the Type A grants, the application opening date is April 1st, and the closing date is June 30th, 2021. However, in previous years, and including this year, we have run out of funds, available funds at the moment. So get your applications in early. Next slide. I'll finish this slide and then ask for questions. So your club, to apply for a Type C grant, has to commit to 4,000 US dollars. Again, a change from last year. It used to be 5,000 Canadian, simplified this year for 4,000 US. If you put in 4,000 US, the district will contribute 5,000 US towards your project. Just like a Type A grant, TRF matches the club funds 50 cents on the dollar, and it matches the district funds dollar for dollar. Do we have any questions here?
It takes a while for people to type.
So the question is, can a Type A and a Type C grant, I have to slide this over so I can actually read, applied for the same project from the same club? The answer is no. The Type A grant can only be applied for by the club that would be the international club on the project. The Type C grant can only be applied for by a club that is not the international club on the project. So these two applications would have to come from different clubs, the international club and another club. So the answer, Bill, is that yes, two clubs can apply for a Type C grant to support a singular grant. And we'll actually do an example of that after we finish answering the questions. Any more questions coming in? Oh. Okay. Can I have the next slide, please? So, Bill, here's the example. So the first club, your club, puts in 4,000 US dollars. Next slide, please. you talk nicely to two other clubs and you can convince them how worthwhile your project is. And each of those two clubs commits $4,000 US dollars. Okay, next slide. So now the district puts in $25,000, $15,000 for the type A application, and $5,000 for each of the type C grants. So that comes up to $25,000. Next slide. So now the Rotary Foundation matches the club funds 50 cents on the dollar. So the $12,000 coming from the flat clubs gets $6,000 from the Rotary Foundation. The $25,000 comes from the $25,000 that comes from the district is matched 1-for-1 for $25,000. And so what that ends up in total is, next slide, $68,000. So for your club contributing $4,000, two other clubs contributing $4,000, you end up with a project that's $68,000. And I'll answer the question from Neil. So it's a yes and a no, Neil, in that how two clubs could each contribute $2,000 is that one club would apply for the type C grant, the funding coming $2,000 from the applicant club and $2,000 from the other club. So you would make one application from one club. Any number of clubs can give money to the club. Now, having said that, there is a but here because we've had this instant come out a couple of years ago, and what is not allowed is for the international club that is applied for the type A grant simply to give $4,000 to another club to apply for a type C grant to support their project. That would be double dipping. Effectively, the international club putting in $8,000 to get out $20,000. Not allowed. The funding for the type C grant has to come from other clubs. And indeed, Neil, two clubs could each throw in $2,000, one of the clubs doing the application and controlling the funding. Indeed, talk about leveraging. So don't follow 5K coming from the district if they're, so as you'll note on the slide that is on the page, Christy, $25,000 does come from the district. I was referring to just the $5,000 for each of the type C grants in the last little conversation. So indeed, if 3 grant clubs are participating, there'd be a type A grant of $15,000 from the district and 2 type C grants for $5,000 each, coming out to a total of $25,000, as you see on the slide displayed at the moment. Any other questions? Okay, next slide. Hey, are you confused yet? This is how I often feel even when I'm presenting the global grants component and talking about global grants. I look like this myself. Having said that, you can get a lot of help if you're a first timer or even a more experienced person. There is help available. Many clubs have applied for global grants, and and within your club, there are people that are experienced on global grants. There are many people in the district that are experienced with global grants. Being Rotarians, most of those people are very willing to help you out and mentor you along your way. So there is help available. Sorry, Judy, what question didn't I answer? If you can answer it again, ask it again, please. Okay, sorry about that. I hit the mute button for a second and I couldn't unmute myself. I had to get the administrator to unmute me. Sorry, I'm looking. But only one club has to be from our district for a pooling. Oh, with C pooling, only one club. So any grants from our district have to be applied for by clubs in our district. A club from outside of our district cannot apply for a grant from our district. So the answer is to get any type C, any application for a type C grant must come from a club in our district. That type C grant, though, can support a global grant project that is led by clubs outside of our district. That is, where both the international club and the host club are outside of the district. You can apply for a type C grant to support that global grant project. So Maria, how you can find a mentor. Why don't we talk about this outside? I can give, I'm not sure if you have my email addresses or Jamie's. You could talk to either one of us and we could help you with that, I'm sure. Okay, thanks. So I think we're ready for our 10-minute break unless there are any other questions.
Think about questions over the break.
And indeed, this has been a complex area. So over the break, if you think of some more questions, I'll start by answering questions since it's going to be me on next. Okay, time for a break. Back online again and ready to start. So if anybody's thought of any questions during the break, please type them into the chat window now. Okay, Bill, so if you can forward Maria the information that she needs, that would be great. Any other questions? Okay, Bill, explain your acronym. Okay, do we have any other questions? Bill, are you going to respond to Pat's question? Okay, so I'm going to make a request of you, Bill. Can you share your email address with everyone? And if anyone who has questions about the International Services Committee should get in touch with Bill. Okay, Emmanuel, regarding the Type B and D grants, just very quickly, these are similar to the Type C grant in that they have to be in support of another club. They were put in place to ensure that we used the majority of our funds available. And so, like I said, they're very similar to Type C grants, a bit looser rules around the amounts. The amounts are significantly more, and how they can be used is a little bit different. As I said, we've not given them out in the last several years. And it is likely that in the coming year, those two types of grants will disappear. We are looking at reorganizing the grant types a little bit for the DDF for global grants. Any further questions? Okay, Mary, if we can have the next slide. So, what other grants are available related to global grants? There are two big ones out there. One is the Rotary Foundation of Canada has partnered with the Government of Canada on one type of grant, which we'll talk about very briefly, and the other goes back from the Alberta government, the Community Initiatives Program. You can get Community Initiative Program funding for a global grant. Next slide, please, Mary. So, the Rotary Foundation Government of Canada program, we're not going to talk much about because it is currently scheduled to end on June 2020, which means it's in the next, as of the next Rotary year, it no longer is available, and we are talking about grants in focusing on the grant process for the next Rotary year and the applications for grant funding for them. I will talk very briefly about it, though, and that this program has been in place for 5 years, or will have been in place for 5 years at the end of June 2020. And it is only for global grants, and it matches, the program matches any funds raised within Canada for a global grant project dollar for dollar. That includes club funds and district designated funds for global grants that are put into the project, are all matched 1-for-1. They do have some additional restrictions and requirements beyond what the Rotary Foundation wants for global grants. And I think that's about all we can say about it. To answer your question, Rick, I believe the answer is yes, there is work being done to extend it. I'm not party to that, those conversations. So at this point, there's been no announcement made on if it will be extended or not. And even if it's extended, the rules may change significantly. Does TRF match TRFC? And the answer is yes. In that they match the TRFC. So TRF matches TRFC funding 50 cents on the dollar. Okay, next slide. So what does that look like when you do, if you do apply for a matching grant from Rotary Foundation of Canada? Your club puts in $4,000 like any other when you want to apply for a Type A grant. 2 other clubs are collaborating with you, similar to our earlier example, each put in $4,000. And between the Type A grant and the 2 Type C grants, our district contributes $25,000. The Rotary Foundation of Canada and Canadian government match that 1-for-1, so $37,000. The Rotary Foundation then matches the club money and the Rotary Foundation of Canada money, 50 cents on the dollar, and the district $25,000 for dollar, bringing it to $49,500. So if you're quick and apply for, get your grant application all together and in place, not in this Rotary year, so it wouldn't be the things you're applying for in the next Rotary year, then you can take advantage of this wonderful partnership. And for $4,000 from your club, $8,000 from combination of 2 other clubs, you can do $123,500 in project funding. Absolutely amazing, that amount of leverage on your club funding. That said, you're going to have to get in quick to ensure you can take advantage of this funding. I will go back. They do have some restrictions that are beyond TRF's restrictions. One of the big ones is around anytime you disturb the soil, they are very concerned with environmental impact. You may have to do an environmental assessment study if you do anything that disturbs the soil, as a perfect example of one of the additional conditions that Rotary Foundation of Canada, Government of Canada puts on. Next slide, please. I'll still talk about Rotary Foundation of Canada. Will come up later in this, I think it's 2 slides from now. You can find out much more about this program at the Rotary Foundation of Canada's website. So funding from Alberta government through the CIP program. Once again, they've got certain restrictions on what they will and won't fund. Check their website. Their rules are all there. And of course, rules for all of these programs do constantly change. They, an answer that I give you today may be different tomorrow. So you always need to look at the current rules that will be available on each of the funders' websites. And that includes the TRF rules, which, coming back to the document, the Rotary Grants Terms and Conditions. If you're looking to apply for a grant, go look at the current version of that document. The CIP grants, for an they used to take the applications 4 times a year. They changed it to 3 times a year. There is only 1 grant per club per year that you can apply for. Unlike global grants, where when you get DDF for global grant funding, you do not have to report to the district. You only have to report to the Rotary Foundation. If you apply for a CIP grant, you have to do a separate report to CIP. So I'm going to answer the question that just came up here. Any collaboration opportunities with CETA? So that actually stopped 5 years ago and was replaced by this partnership. What was happening was that individual Rotary clubs were applying to CETA, Canadian International Development Agency, for funding because CETA has grants available. What the Canadian government, CETA, decided was they looked at what a trusted organization Rotary is and Rotary Foundation is, that it did not make sense for CETA to administer those grants directly, go through all the qualifying, read all the applications, get reports from them, that Rotary itself, the Rotary Foundation and Rotary clubs does such a fantastic job at international projects that they would allow the Rotary Foundation of Canada to administer these funds. So effectively, these are CETA funds that are being administered by the TRFC Government of Canada program. And hence Rotary clubs cannot directly apply to CETA. This is how they do it. And indeed, Graham, I see your comment. So I was being simplistic because there are quite a number of rules about how many CIP grants of various types you can apply for. And you are correct. You can apply for only one CIP and one capital grant and one non-capital grant each fiscal year. However, there is a international grant can be of either type. And it combines with if you apply for a local one. So the rules are can be a little bit complex because CIP does offer 3 different types of grants. Again, I would suggest you go to the CIP website and review the rules if you're thinking of applying for a CIP grant. Back to CIP, well, staying on CIP grants. So your club can apply for a CIP grant without it being part of a global grant. You can apply for a CIP grant for an international project without any funds coming from the district or any funds coming from the Rotary Foundation to do international work. You can also apply for a CIP grant in association with a district project grant to do international work. So there's a lot of flexibility there on the CIP grants. Do we have any other questions about CIP grants or Rotary Foundation of Canada, Government of Canada grants? Okay, Mary, next slide, please. So a little bit more information about CIP. Here's where some of the confusion on grant applications, if you're doing a global grant, can come in, is that CIP is a Canadian, Alberta-based organization. They do everything in Canadian dollars. Their maximum grant is 25 for international projects. Their maximum grant is 25,000 Canadian dollars. And for each dollar from the club, CIP matches that dollar for dollar up to the maximum. Typically, CIP, well, how it works is CIP has a pool of money to give out in each application, round of applications. Typically, they get more applications than they have money for. And typically, they cut down the amount that each application gets. So you're not guaranteed you will get the amount you apply for. One of the other interesting things is that what CIP will match is not only money from your clubs, but if you've applied for DDF funding or district project grant funding, so DDF for global grant or district project grant fundings, CIP counts that as club funds and will match that dollar for dollar. Going the next step on, CIP, if you get approved, when you get approved by CIP, writes your club a check that your club deposits in their own bank account. Because your club has received the funds for CIP, from CIP, when you go to the next step, applying for the global grant from the Rotary Foundation, The Rotary Foundation counts CIP funds as club funds. In fact, on the application, you would not even have a separate line for CIP funding. You would include it in with your funds. Like all club funds, Rotary Foundation matches at 50 cents on the dollar. Any questions? Okay, next slide, please, Mary. So, as I said earlier, you can actually apply for a global grant without getting any funds for the district. However, now your club has to put in significantly more money than if you applied for DDF for global grant funding through a Type A grant and partnering with other clubs for Type C grants. If you put in $15,000, and in this case applied for a CIP grant matching that, that being roughly 20,000 Canadian, and the CIP accepted your application and gave you the full 20,000 Canadian, 15,000 US, that would be matched by the foundation 50 cents on the dollar, giving you a project size of $45,000. Just as a note, the minimum project size for a global grant is $30,000. The minimum funding that you can ask for from the Rotary Foundation is $15,000. So if you're doing a global grant project completely on club funds, whether it's from your club or involving CIP as that counts as club funds, you would have to put in 30,000 US dollars to get $15,000 from the foundation for a $45,000 project. And that would be the minimum size project you could do solely with club funds. And like I said, a significant contribution from your club. Any questions? Okay, next slide, please, Mary. So, the Rotary Foundation, like many grant providers, is constantly changing the rules. Come back to where you can find out more about the rules, the current version of the rules. Look at the Rotary Grants Terms and Conditions document. Some of the changes in the last couple years, one of the things that is not allowed is new construction. You're allowed to renovate, you're allowed to upgrade, you are not allowed to do new construction with a global grant. One of the slight changes to allow a little bit of flexibility is that the Rotary Foundation now allows what they define as low-cost shelters and simple schools. As long as those are part of a much larger project. That can't be the only thing that's being done. It has to be a portion of a much larger project. The rules around what is meant by a low-cost shelter and simple schools, these are documents that are multiple pages long. If you're interested in this, I would suggest that you go to the Rotary.org website, and the documents are available there. One of the other changes that up until a couple years ago, a global grant project working could be in one geographical area, could be funding a lot of little things to happen that really were not directed to a singular outcome other than generally improving things in that area. That is no longer allowed. What it has to be is one cohesive project that aims towards a singular goal or sets of goals. Disaster recovery, the answer is global grants cannot be used for disaster recovery. It can be used for disaster reconstruction as opposed to recovery. And some of that ties to the sustainability aspect. Disaster recovery is a one-time instant thing. There's there's no sustainability around what you do. I know it sustains the lives of the people, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, disaster recovery is not allowed. If you're talking about disaster reconstruction, then low-cost shelters would be allowed. Again, however, you couldn't just build shelters as part of the Global Grant project. It would have to be doing a lot of other related things that the shelters were part of. Another new requirement is that if you're digging a well, drilling a well, a hydrological survey needs to be completed. However, the cost of the survey can be part of your budget. However, it cannot be done as like everything else. You cannot spend money or commit spending of money until your project's approved. So you can't do the survey ahead. So if you include the hydrological survey cost as part of your project budget, you have to do it after your project has been approved. If you want to be assured that there is water available, you would have to pay for that hydrological survey with club funds that are not part of the global grant ahead of time. One of the other recent changes, and this is evolving, is around community assessments. The Rotary Foundation is being more and more stringent on what they mean by a community assessment, and is now requiring quite a formal community assessment of the needs of the community. This is talking to the community, talking to the people that are actually going to be your beneficiaries, talking to the community leaders, and formally documenting this. And not just, I said talking, it's more in the forms of things like questionnaires or various other ways of doing a needs assessment. And there are a number of different techniques on that. So something you needed to keep in mind before you start is that you are going to need to do a formal needs assessment. So Cindy, hydrological assessment be done as one global project. So the question, it depends. You could have a global grant in 1 year, and as long as the hydrological assessment was related to the first global grant, for example, if you're drilling a number of wells in a location and you did a hydrological assessment for that whole area, and you drilled several wells as part of your first project, and then did another project in the same geographical area that was drilling more wells, I believe you could use the same hydrological assessment for that. I see no reason why not. Any other questions? I will do an add-on to that one. So if your first global grant project was, say, around basic education, you could not include a hydrological assessment in that unless somehow you get to tie it to basic education. Any other questions? Okay, next slide. So how do you get started? So now we've been talking about the rules around grants and global grants in particular. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, well, now what do? You have a project in mind, you have a general idea of what you want to do. How do you get going? Next slide. So first of all, for any project, in this district project, global grant project, what is the real need? It's not your idea of the need. If you've been someplace and you go visiting on your travels and you go, oh, here's what they really need. That may not be what they really need. That is what you think they need. You need to talk to the community. What do they believe they really need? They're the ones that know their own community best. So that comes back to that TRS requirement of a formal needs assessment. You must involve the community in determining the needs. You also should be involving the community in planning. This is their community. You parachuting it in and saying, here's what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, may not go over that well. You can often prepare the community with training ahead of time or as part of the project, helping improve their community on their capabilities of the community. Another thing that really helps to lead to buy-in in the community is if the community has skin in the game. If they can contribute funds or volunteer hours. If you need a trench being built, do you have to pay for it? Can the community volunteer to do it? Need to think about things like that. Next slide, please. So, I mentioned earlier about the Rotary's view on sustainability, the Rotary definition of sustainability. Their definition is called the 6 steps to sustainability. If you Google 6 steps to sustainability and include the Rotary, you'll come up with a number of documents that give a lot of details about this. So there's 6 steps. It's really a process for sustainability. Start with community. Talk to them. What do they really need? Encourage local ownership. The contribution of money or labor to the project. Provide training. When you leave, are they going to know how to maintain what you've just given them? That's very important. Another big thing to sustainability isn't just the project itself, it's a sustainability, the improvement of the local economy. When you buy local, you help the economy of that area. If you have a choice of buying local, if you could buy items in Canada, put them in a container and ship them. However, if you could buy them local, much better to buy them local. It supports the local economy, improves the local community. Of course, there are some items that you cannot buy locally, specialized medical equipment. You're going to have to buy typically outside of the local community, i.e. in Canada, the United States, etc., and have shipped there. Come back to, if you can, buy locally. Find local funding. If you can get other organizations locally to provide funding, they're going to support your project. They're going to be one of your biggest cheerleaders if a local organization has contributed money. And last but not least is measure your success. This is so important as learning. Did you do the right thing? Did you actually end up doing what you thought you'd do? Did you make the changes in the community that you thought you'd make? Improve the lives of people the way you thought they'd improve? The reason this is so important, not just to pat yourself on your back, because every project is a success, it's also to learn where your mistakes were, where you could have improved, where you actually successful in doing what you thought. Big reason for this is many international projects, you're successful in one, you want to do the same thing. It only makes sense. You know how to do it, you can do it better the second time. Were you successful or not will help you figure out what changes you need in your next project to make it even better than your first one. Any questions? Next slide, please. So every Rotary project, and this includes where you're getting funds from the district for any type of district project, has to be in one of the 6 areas of focus: peace and conflict prevention and resolution, disease prevention and treatment, water and sanitation, maternal and child health, basic education and literacy, economic and community development. So once again, if you want more information, there is a lot more detail about what Rotary means by each of these 6 areas of focus. If you simply Google Rotary 6 areas of focus, you'll come up with documents that have a much bigger definition of these rather than the one-liners. And these do seem to be very general. However, I have seen projects rejected because they did not meet the requirements. Just as an example, if you wanted to sponsor a hospital in another country or improve the facilities in a hospital in another country, and in particular, the section of the hospital that dealt with broken bones and other traumatic injuries, you will note that the medical areas here are disease prevention and treatment and maternal and child health. That does not cover, neither of those areas really cover general traumatic injury treatment. Likewise, basic education and literacy, providing scholarships or providing funding for a university would not count as basic education or literacy. So not everything you do falls under these 6 areas of focus. You have to ensure you fall under them. Once again, for a better definition of each of these, either go to rotary.org or Google Rotary 6 areas of focus, and you'll find documentation on the definition of each of these areas and what Rotary considers within them and not within them. Any questions? So Craig, and indeed, Minot has pointed out that these definitions do change over time. And a perfect example is one of the recent changes to water and sanitation is that menstrual hygiene management was added in 2018. So once again, I'll emphasize that you do look up the current version of each of these documents if you're thinking about pursuing a project in one of these areas. I have a question about a pilot project or proof of concept. The answer is generally for global grants, the Rotary Foundation will not provide funding for pilots or proof of concept. Now, having said that, are you really doing a phase 1 and doing a small project as phase 1 with the intent of doing a much larger project after it's successful as phase 2? That makes it, of course, a phase 1 project as opposed and a phase 2 project rather than a pilot project and then ongoing projects. Okay, I'm backtracking here. I just making sure caught all of the questions. So there's a question about local organizations. Can whoever asked that clarify their question? Okay, again, if there was a question about local organizations, if whoever asked that can re-ask and possibly clarify it. Okay. Next slide. And who can help you? As I mentioned before, there are people in our district, possibly within your club, who has done global grant projects before. Talk to them. Many of them will be very willing to mentor you. There are also people in your club that you should consider as becoming part of the project, committee members. There are people, any global grant is going to have a fair bit, most global grants, maybe not every, are going to have a fair bit of accounting and financial management to do. Do you have somebody in your club who has financial skills? One of the other things is that when you make these applications, then you're writing an application. If somebody in your club has very good writing skills, writes convincingly, get them to help you in your project. Get them to help you with writing the grant applications. Likewise, subject matter experts. If you're wanting to do a medical related project, do you have somebody who's a doctor in your club that could help you out on it? You have all these people that can back you up. So who else can help you? In the host country, a trusted Rotary club. If you're doing a global grant project, you do need a host Rotary club, and you do need to trust them. You do need to get them to help you do things like the needs assessment. Yes, you can go over and be part of it. However, your Rotary club knows the community. They know who to talk to. They can be heavily involved, if not do all of the needs assessment for the global grant project. They are also going to be involved with the financial management. You need to trust them with that. Likewise, many projects, you're going to need a non-government organization, some sort of organization to help you implement. The Rotarians in the host country may not have the expertise to implement the project on their own. You often need to partner with an implementer on that. And when you do, there is, for global grant project, there is a document that needs to be filled out and signed by all parties, laying out how you're going to operate together. I'm going to go back and answer, would Rotary Parks and Trails fall under community development? Without knowing more specifics, Margie, I don't know how to answer that question. And community development as, so if you're talking about a global grant project, community development, certainly for a global grant project, refers to economic development in the community rather than recreational development. Again, typically. Locally, if you're getting a district project grants, they will support things like parks and trails. Any other questions? Okay, next slide, please, Mary. Okay, if you're applying for grants, you really need to understand the criteria of grants. Look at the documentation that the organization that you're requesting the grant from provides regarding what is allowed, not allowed, time frames, everything else. Look at the grantor's documentation on that. Different grants want you to talk in different ways. The language they use can be different between the types of grants. It's good if you can understand what they're asking and how you should reply to them. Again, if you have somebody that's experienced with applying for that type of grant to help you out, great. Understand the deadlines for each grants and how you're going to have to order the grants. And understand the activities that have to happen before you apply. Needs assessment, perfect example. And before you start with a grant, it's really good if you can understand the reporting requirements. It's fine charging through all of this. If you haven't collected the information you need to complete your reports at the end of the project, you're going to be in trouble. Next slide, please. What you really need to do, even before you start applying, is a solid implementation plan. What activities you're going to carry out and your timeline. You're also going to need good estimates of the cost of each activity. If you're doing a global grant and you're purchasing large price tag items, the Rotary Foundation will usually ask you to provide 3 quotes for each of those larger priced items. You can get those ahead of time before you even apply, since you know you're going to be asked. The Rotary Foundation limits certain types of costs. An example of this for project management and administration, you're limited to 10% of the project budget for project management and administration costs. Need to be aware of that. You also need to identify where you're going to get your money from. Your club, obviously, looking to other clubs from your community, and the various grants from the district or from the Rotary Foundation, community initiative programs, etc. Any questions? Okay, next slide, Mary. And now you're ready to start applying for grants. Probably not quite yet, but pretty close. Next slide, please, Mary. So where you can find more is regional learning days typically have had sessions on applying for grants, planning for grants, needs assessment. Different learning days have covered different topics, as well as the a district convention, a district conference, I should say. There have been sessions carried out with more information around how you apply for grants and how both at the district and through the Rotary Foundation for global grants. So here are the dates for the district regional learning days. Question is, can we do these online? So the answer is, I do not know that. The answer to that question, Cindy, I'm sorry, I'm not involved in the planning for these sessions. Rick Eisted is. So Rick, if you could answer, will the regional learning days be available online? And Rick, while you're thinking about that and typing, I'll go to the next question because we're getting close on time. So the question about improving early hearing detection, I think that would fall under the area of focus of maternal and child health rather than disease prevention, because I don't believe hearing loss detection would be a disease. I may be wrong. I'm not a expert. So Dawn, I see your comment. So I'm only answering them if they have a more global that the answer helps understand the type of grants and how the question applies again. The more broad than this. I'll start that sentence again. I'm answering questions if they have applicability to gain for understanding for everybody, not just the person asking. Any more questions? Next slide, please, Mary. Okay, thanks, Rick. So we were incorrect on those days. As Rick has pointed out, the dates we just showed you were the club leadership training dates. I apologize for that. Right, and as Rick said, they are moving towards webinar delivery of the learning days. So where you can get more information about all of these grants, the global grant area in particular, on this slide, which I won't go over, you'll all end up getting, can look at a version of this to get the websites from. Next slide, please. And I am standing in for the Global Grants team lead today, Leslie Biles, and there's her email. Again, be available on the copy of this presentation. And it's Leslie that you should ask questions about global grants and applying for global grants. Any more questions today on global grants? Is anybody awake out there still? Hey, if there's no more questions, let's move on to the next section. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thank you for unmuting me, Craig. It's Hendrik Cray here for Calgary Olympic and chair of the Global Grant Scholarship Subcommittee or team. Next slide, please. So global grant scholarships are a type of scholarship for graduate study. It's a kind of global grant, rather like what we've been talking about, but another variant on it. It's an area that our district has set aside significant money, some $30,000 in district designated funds, which then get matched at 100%, which allows us then to fund 2 scholarships. The basic principle of it is it's a scholarship to fund 1 year of graduate study outside of Canada, MA, MSc, or PhD in one of the Rotary Foundation's 6 areas of focus. Again, I don't have to go over them. It's very much up to the scholarship candidate to explain how his or her proposed program of study actually fits into one of these areas. So there is a certain amount of thinking about that we have to do. Next slide, please. The scholarship value is $30,000 US. Again, the minimum size of a global grant funded project. Normally, as I said, for 1 year, although on a couple of occasions we have actually spread it over 2 years, which is certainly permitted. It's funded by the district designated funds and the World Fund match, so it doesn't cost anything to Rotary clubs. And that's really important. So we're not asking for club contributions. The only really assistance that we're asking for from clubs is to help us identify candidates and to promote this program. We have a preference for new programs of study. And the main reason for this is quite simply that when we're getting someone going into a new program of study, he or she's much more likely to be here in the district, and we can do more mentorship and promotion. And some of you may have met the 2 scholarship students who went out and just started their studies last month, who are both from this district and visited a number of clubs. They do need to be the candidates for this, are to be residents of District 5360, and then the study has to be international outside of Canada. A very important ineligibility criterion that is one that's established by the Rotary Foundation, is a long-standing rule, is that Rotarians and their descendants or ancestors are not eligible for this, scholarship. Next slide, please. So basically our application process, we have an application deadline on January 20th of next year. In the fall, we're trying to promote this. We hope that clubs and the district will help us identify candidates. We also have lots of connections with university programs that are likely to generate, from this district, are likely to generate qualified candidates. The application form and more information, in this case, is not on the 5360.org website, but on rotary5360.ca, because this is public-facing information. We invite anyone to apply. We get the applications, the committee interviews and ranks, and then in the winter and on into the spring, we seek international partners. This is a global grant, so it has to involve another Rotary club in the area where in the district where the student's going to be studying. We prepare the global grant application to the Rotary Foundation, and then in the fall, the scholarship recipients begin their program of study. Next slide, please. So the information is on the district website under grants, and then global scholarship funding. You can pull it, drop it down there. Next slide, please. And just to kind of show you what we've been doing here, these 5 happy people are our 5 most recent recipients of global grant scholarships. And I won't go talk further about them, but I certainly could tell you much more about the great work that these people have been doing and the great ways in which they represent our district and values of Rotary outside of Canada during their studies. And next slide, please. And this is the Global Grant Scholarship team. My contact information, phone and email if you have any questions or want to talk about or want to send candidates to speak, prospective students to speak to me, please put them in touch with me. And I'm always inviting more people to come and join the scholarship team. We have a nice team that's representing a lot of areas of the district, but we'd love to have you as well. So get in touch with me if you're interested in finding out more about what's involved and how you can help. And that is it for me, and I don't see any questions have been coming up on the chat function. So I'll just move it on to the next slide and hand it over to Marie.
Am I online now? I'm Marie Ricard. I'm from Calgary West Rotary, and I am the committee chair for the subcommittee from the subcommittee chair for the Peace Fellowships. Just a little bit about Peace Fellowships because they're different than the global scholarships that Hendrik has been looking after. The Rotary Peace Fellowship is the premier academic program of the Rotary Foundation. Through rigorous academic training, field experience, and global networking opportunities, Rotary Peace Fellows are able to access resources and develop skills they need to become leaders and catalysts for peace and development in their community and around the globe. So these people that we're looking for that are targets are you not hearing me? Oh. Are you okay now? All right, yes, thank you. So the people that would apply for a Rotary Peace Fellowship are people who are already in an established career in peace and development. So we're looking at people that have been out in the workforce. So next slide. Hi, there's two programs under Peace Fellowship. The first one is a fully funded master's degree academic fellowship at Peace Centers. And these Peace Centers are designated by the Rotary Foundation. They have specific programs that people would apply for. So applicants would need to go to those websites, to the Rotary website, and go to the university website and see what they would be interested in studying. So there are 5 different universities, 2 in the US, 1 in Japan, 1 in the UK, 1 in Australia, and 1 in Sweden. The other program is a professional development certificate, which is 3 months and it is at Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. Typically, successful candidates have about 5 to 7 years of experience in a peace-related field. So they're in the workforce, they're already working on peace-related kind of issues in their workplace and their volunteer life. Again, ineligible are Rotarians and their descendants or any ancestors. Next slide. Just to say about that, there are about 100 Peace Fellows that fellowships are given out every year, and 50 in the master's degree program and 50 in the professional development certificate program. And we are always looking for eligible candidates. So please share this information with people who think would be interested in applying for this kind of a fellowship. Now, for the application, it starts in February with an announcement from Rotary Foundation. So it will open up on the rotary.org site in February. And the deadline for them to make application, and the application and everything is right on the Rotary site. Lots of good information there, and your best source for information on Peace Fellowships. The deadline for them is May 31st, 2020, for this coming year. The district then will get that application after they apply on May 31st. And the district vets the application, interviews the applicants, and nominates one or more to Rotary International by July 1st. So we have a month to that kind of work. Rotarian mentorship is beneficial in doing the application, so communicating back and forth is a great way for them to get your feedback on that. And the district does do an endorsement for those candidates by that July 1 deadline. The applicants find out in November whether they're successful or not. So they're really looking for the following year for their funding to kick in. Next slide. On the district site, there is an area to get some information. There's some information on our latest candidate, the latest Peace Fellow, and you might find that interesting. So it's under service and grants. Next page. And here are 2 of the most recent candidates for the Peace Fellow. We didn't have an application last year, but Lorelei Higgins and Megan Parkinson, you probably heard them at the district conference. Maybe they came and spoke to you. And Lorelei, I know, is interested in doing that. Next page. And here's our committee. And like Hendrik, we're always looking for more people to join our committee and to help us get the word out and to educate as well as to interview and vet. And that's kind of all for these fellows. Now, on the chat. I think that's all for me.
Okay, I guess I'm up next, and I'm Gail Williams, and I'm your reports monitor, mainly involved in the reviewing of reports for district grants. As Kurt mentioned, the Rotary Foundation looks after your global grant reporting. So, next screen, please, Mary. To start off with, when you're embarking on a district grant, be sure you know what documentation you're going to need afterwards. You don't want to get 2 years down the road and not have collected the receipts or documents that you will need to report, need for reporting. Receipts are required for all expenditures. This is a change from a couple of years ago when there was a minimum amount that no longer is effective. Receipts are required for everything. If it's an international project, there may be occasions where receipts are difficult to obtain for small expenditures like a rickshaw ride, a small item like that. You'll be carrying with you a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. Just have them sign that and write the dollar amount for the service and retain that document. For goods, most vendors will have some sort of receipt they can provide. Make sure the documentation demonstrates that the funds were used in line with the purpose of your grant. And for the amount in the application. Arm's length, funds cannot be paid to a Rotarian for their goods or services. That pretty well applies to all instances. But there is an occasion where Rotarian offers a service and they may be the only person in the area that offers that. You need 3 quotations, have them documented, and it needs to be evident that you picked the best choice. Anything like that is contained in the terms and conditions that we've been referring to throughout the webinar. If you want more about it, it's in section 13. You want to establish a clear audit trail. You want to prove that funds were paid for the particular service, and that's in line with the grant, and that led to the transaction occurring. This is a big one. For project grants, you have 2 members of the club who are contacts, primary and secondary contact. They should know where the records are for that grant at all times and have access to them. So they shouldn't be just maintained on one computer if that's how you're keeping track of what's going on. Members do leave Rotary. Members can be on a business trip and not available to make a report, or members do pass. Anyways, make sure people know what's going on. 2 years is a long time for some of these grants, and no record keeping to be maintained by more than one person. Next screen, please. Reporting. First of all, for the 2018-19 year, we will have reports due the final date next summer. In fact, it's August 10th, 2020 for the 18-19 grants. For the 19-20 grants, the earlier of 60 days following completion of the project, or September 9th, because we had a later approval date by the foundation. It doesn't say July 15th, but it was extended to September 9th, the day before we received the funds. For 2021, we're assuming everything's going to go smoothly and we'll have approval by July 15th. Therefore, July 15th, 2022 will be the reporting date, the final reporting date. Again, if it's finished earlier, do it within 60 days of completion. All reports are to be submitted electronically to the website, the grant website, and electronically does not include emails or any other electronic means. So next screen, please. So these are just some of the most common issues that I see, and it's people not knowing beforehand what they had to submit when reporting. So read that application thoroughly, read the final report form. Both of those templates are on the grant website. Know what it is what is acceptable and what is not for that grant type, particularly for youth program grants. And that one's got a long list of ineligible expenditures. If in doubt, just send me an email and I will try to help you. I mentioned both the primary and secondary and other members of the club need to be kept abreast of what's going on and have access to the receipts and supporting documents for reporting. I mentioned receipts required for everything, and they must be specific to the receipt must be specific to the goods provided, such as for accommodations. The hotel summary statement is not sufficient. You need the actual statement that indicates the room type, the cost per room, how many rooms, okay? Credit card receipts. Unless they specifically indicate the goods acquired, the receipts alone are not sufficient. When you're down in Mexico and you pull up to the gas pump and you pay by credit card, it will say the number of liters of gasoline purchased, and it'll indicate that it was gas, whatnot. But in most other circumstances, the credit card receipt just shows that you used your credit card for a purchase. So make sure it's specific on the receipt. Next screen, please, Mary. As you gather your receipts and support documents, put them in a folder. It makes it much easier for yourself when it comes time for reporting, rather than scrambling through unknown or untold number of folders or a stack of receipts for everything. Charitable receipts or operating expenses or admin expenses of your charitable organization that you support it, those are not sufficient. You need to have specific items, proof of specific items acquired. Okay. As covered in travel grants, there's limitations on the how the funds can be spent. This is an area where we have many problems with the receipts. So just make sure you're spending in line with the grant and what was approved in the grant. Don't let it be a surprise that reports are due 2 years down the road. Diarize when it's due and keep your eye on that. And next screen, please. And I am finished, and over to Craig now. No questions? That's great.
So I think we're in the home stretch here. So just a few comments about the grants website. And I think I'm the last presenter here. So if we can go to the next slide. So I think as you've heard a number of times in the various presentations, the district grants website is a fabulous resource for submitting applications, submitting reports, and as well, it contains just about all the documentation that you're going to need to complete an application. Later on today or into tomorrow, I will have the PowerPoint slides from this presentation stacked in the documentation page, ready for your review. So all of the district application or district project type applications are made through this website, although the international project, the global grants, are made on the RI website. Next slide, please. So the most common question that we encounter with the website is around logins. So this particular website is not interconnected with Club Runner or anything like that. It maintains a separate login, and you can get that from the webmasters anytime you need it. You do not need to log in to access the documentation tab, which has all of the various forums on it. But to actually submit projects, you do need to have a login. You can just click that login link to get into the site, and then you'll be able to browse projects and submit your own. Every now and then, the website does get synchronized with Club Runner, so new club members, even new clubs, are updated periodically. If you don't find that you can log in, by all means let me know, and I can actually create a profile for you as well. Next slide. Yeah, and it just says if you are not in the system, contact the webmaster via the link provided and we'll get you set up. One comment I did want to make is that certain functionality from the website is locked down until the MOU has been uploaded. So the MOU is a PDF document. It is available under the documentation link right now. The club president-elect and nominee for the following year are both required to execute signature on that page. The signature page does need to be scanned, and there's an upload link on that page with instructions for how to upload the MOU to the District Grants website. When the District Grants Committee accepts the MOU, more of the functionality of the website is unlocked, and you'll begin to actually create project applications. But it's important to remember you cannot do that until the MOU has been accepted by the committee. So next slide, please. This is just a notation that forgotten passwords cannot be retrieved, so entering information and clicking email password will cause a new password to be generated. And the one we send you you can update yourself to create a new one that's easier to remember once you're logged in. The next, please. And I think that's the end of our slides. So I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Jamie to wrap this up.
Thanks, Craig. I just noticed there's one question from Judy asking how are Rotarians that are no longer with the club removed from the list of people on the website.
So we do that as part of our periodic synchronization. We don't necessarily delete everyone outright because if their names are associated with past projects, past documentation, we may want to maintain that for archival or audit purposes. But those accounts are locked out. So you can see a name occasionally in a list. That probably means that they were an owner of a document at one point. If they don't own any content on the website, then in part of our periodic sweeps, we will clean that out.
Great. So that is all we have for you. And surprisingly, we only went 15 minutes over. So that's pretty good. Thank you all for taking the time to log in and participate with us. I hope you found it helpful and now are ready to go out and find your projects and start writing grant proposals. And a special thanks to Kurt, Gail, Hendrik, Marie, and Craig for presenting, and of course to our District Governor-elect Mary Turner for being our Vanna White and handling the slides. And a special extra thanks to Craig for handling all this setting up of the Zoom and handling all this technical stuff, which I think went, not bad for the first crack. And just once again, all the information that we went over in this entire presentation will be on the district5360.org website. And as you all know, email never sleeps, so feel free to send us an email with any questions you have, and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. And thanks again, everyone, and have a great weekend. We're all done.